So coming to buy a camera is always a big important thing. And back in the days was slightly easier than it is today. We either bought a 35mm or a medium format or a large format camera, and that was it. And it was very easy to determine which type of camera would suit a photographer rather than another. And the main feature was how light and portable the camera was versus how precise and heavy, on the other hand, it would be. So a studio photographer would most likely use a plate camera, when a photojournalist, on the other hand, would use a 35mm camera. Today, there's so many questions, there's so many options that is a slightly more complex than that. And we're not going to be able to look at every single type of cameras, but we're going to divide them into the main types that are out there. So the very first question that we need to look at is the size of the. We talked about sensor last time, and we mentioned that there are some sensors that are larger than others. On this type of camera, on the most commonly used camera, which are the DSLRs and the mirrorless, which we'll see in a second. The number one question is, are we going to buy a full frame, or are we going to buy a crop sensor, and which one is best and what not? There is a guidance. Generally speaking, the larger the sensor, the better it is, but it also the more expensive it gets. Having said that, there are crop sensors that have very high specs and they perform very well. However, if you're beginning photography, and you could probably save a bit of money just going with a crop sensor, have it a go, play with the camera, and then later on upgrade to a full frame camera. One of the main difference of today's market versus 20 years ago market is that back in the days, we bought the camera once, we loaded up with film, and we kept on investing on different lenses. Today is slightly different because the camera that we buy today, it gets outdated pretty quickly. And so that's another things to consider when investing a lot of money on a camera. That's not going to be the last investment. If you're serious about photography and you progress with your photography, at some point, sooner or later, within 3 to 5 years, probably 5 years, you will need to upgrade, or you most likely will want to upgrade your camera. So considering that, it really depends where you are, what's your budget, what your intentions are. But before buying a camera, those are the things that I normally think, how long I'm going to have this camera for? Is it going to pay off for itself, or is it just a passion, or whatnot? But in generally speaking, the bigger the sensor, the better the quality of the camera. Okay. Oops, let me go back here. Excuse me. Okay. Should be able to. No. The beauty of a live session. I can't seem to go forward with my presentation, but I should be. Preview. Where are you? View. Okay, let's start it again. Fantastic. So crop sensor versus full frame, great. The other big topic, which is really hot right now, is mirrorless versus reflex. We saw last time how a reflex works, and we're going to show you again. Basically, reflex has a, let me go quickly forward. It has a mirror inside, okay? So an image travels through the lens, it hits the mirror, which sends the picture through the viewfinder. And the sensor, this pink part is down here. But when we shoot, the mirror goes up and the light travels through and hit the sensor. Beautiful. On a mirrorless, on the other way, we don't have that apparatus. We don't have a mirror. That's why it's called mirrorless. What happens instead, the picture hits the sensor straight away, and the sensor feeds electronically what we call an EVF, which is an electronic viewfinder. Now, great. This is quite recent. Sony launched professional cameras that were mirrorless for the first time, and Nikon and Canon and all the other major brands followed very quickly. And nowadays, the majority of cameras sold for professional mirrorless. And there are a few advantages and disadvantages of having a mirrorless versus a DSLR. The main advantage of having a mirrorless nowadays is, which we can come here, is, well, it really depends. It's got a better focusing system nowadays. It didn't used to. So if you're buying a second-hand mirrorless, watch out. The old version of mirrorless did struggle with focus, or was quite slow the way they focus. DSLR were much better. But new technology of mirrorless make possible that basically they're competing on the same level, if not even faster. Or they're getting there, they're getting faster. But one of the main advantages that DSLR, when it comes to focusing, which I can show you here, the DSLR has points. So you can decide on which point to focus. Maybe you can focus on areas, but they are generally limited to the center part of the frame. With a mirrorless nowadays, the focus is all the same. So you can potentially autofocus on the corners or all the side of the frame, which is totally new when it comes to autofocusing. Another advantage of the mirrorless, and I mean, this is a Sony that was the first one to introduce a 5-way to image stabilization. Image stabilization, basically, it counter your handheld movement. So we can only shoot up to a certain speed before our picture get blurred because we're shaking. And that's when we need a tripod. And in-camera and image stabilization is there to counter that movement and make a picture sharper. And Canon and Nikon and all the other major brands usually have it in the lens, used to have it in the lens, and there are different claims on how many stop or shutter speed they can counter to. But definitely, this was quite new, and a 5 and it performs better than the old DSLR, definitely. And these are the two main advantages of mirrorless. And some people call it the advantage is lighter, it's smaller. Personally, I don't think that having a smaller, lighter camera, it is an advantage for me. I don't have problem carrying a heavier camera, but I like to have a good grip on a camera. Those earlier mirrorless were so tiny, this was the thing, that I've actually used them and I couldn't really wedge my finger through the lenses and the handle. Quite uncomfortable to use, for my opinion. On the other hand, if you have really small hands, they might be perfect for what you're trying to use. I see a question, what is the sensor sizing mirrorless? That's a really good question. They're both, you can have them crop or full frame, really depends on the manufacturer, but the professional mirrorless, they do come with full frame too. But these things are, yeah, they are. So coming back to the differences, the main difference is the electronic viewfinder in the mirrorless. And an optical viewfinder like a DSLR that works through the mirror is basically as watching in real life. You don't get any difference, you don't get any fancy, strange things. In electronic viewfinder, those early one, again, if you're buying a second-hand one, they were not as good as the one today. They are getting astonishingly good, and very soon we won't be able to see the difference. People talk about lagging, meaning that moving the camera, we see a fraction later what happens because it's feeding back into the viewfinder and it's lagging some time. But honestly, I don't think that is anymore an issue with this modern camera. And we need to test it. I don't think that the mirrorless are for everyone. I don't think the DSLR is necessarily something of the past, even if it seems that way. But on a good side of the DSLR, They're amazing cameras still today. They're bigger and heavier, yes, I know, but they offer, they've been around for so long that they offer the excellent lenses. And the range of lenses is much greater at this stage. And I'm sure they'll catch up with the mirrorless ones. But at this stage, there's a greater selection of lenses. But also, since a lot of people are moving to mirrorless, I think today, if you're starting as a photographer and you are in a second-hand market, then you can definitely, most likely, grab a great DSLR for quite a without spending too much money. I'm not saying bargain, but it depends really where you are and what you buy at the time. So I'm sure that the debate of what is better, I mean, there are countless people talking about these things, and everyone has a different opinion. The best advice that I have is try. If you're into buying a camera, just go your way. If mirrorless or a DSLR, the best advice, if you're about to invest money, just go and try. If you have a friend, ask to borrow a camera for a day or two. Maybe some store will loan a camera for a couple of hours or for a day or two as well. Try different, talk to the shop owner. But don't trust anyone and your senses, because there's no such thing as the best camera, but what works for you. And that is going to be priceless. If you can't stand electronic viewfinder, you're definitely a DSLR person. If the electronic viewfinder don't bother you, I think the main advantage of a mirrorless, I almost forgot, is the fact that you can feed the exposure in the viewfinder, meaning that if your picture it's overly bright or underexposed or overexposed, you can actually see that by moving and adjusting your shutter speed or aperture. As you adjust exposure, you can see that fed into the viewfinder. And so there is a greater potential for, if you're working in manual, never to get those blown out or underexposed photos, because you're instantly correcting them. You can see before pressing. On a DSLR, on the other hand, you just see reality through this mirror. And when you press, then you have to check your exposure to make sure that that is what you meant to do. So of all the things about mirrorless, I think that's quite priceless, especially for those people that love to use manual and love to capture things as they happen, more street photography or whatnot. Because if you're in studio, that doesn't really help you. You just, if you're working on a tripod, that function doesn't really help you. You got the time, you can adjust exposure. It's not a problem. But if you're working on a fast environment, moving, and you don't want to use AV or TV, you could use that function, and that could be very handy. So, recapping very quickly, we've seen crop sensors versus full frame. Crop sensor, as the word says, it's a sensor that has been cropped, therefore is smaller. The bigger the sensor, the better the quality, but also the more pricey the camera gets. But that's the main difference between the two. Very often they are the same sensor, just one smaller than the other, okay? The other camera types that we just looked at are the mirrorless versus the reflex. The mirrorless are on the rise nowadays. They're smaller. Because they're smaller and they have an electronic viewfinder, and they've got all this function that we looked at. Another disadvantage this time of mirrorless is the life of the battery. They don't last as much because of they're constantly on with the sensor. And so that's a drawback. Or either you get more batteries with you, or they're not lasting nowhere near as much as the counterpart in the reflex cameras. And then we move on to the very high top end of cameras that produces medium format camera. Now, what is a medium format camera? Imagine this sensor here of this camera, or this camera. We'll blow it up a little bigger, and you get a medium format camera. The word medium format comes from the film times, where we had 35mm cameras, and then we got this step in between the 35 and the large plate cameras. And medium format today, I've got different different sizes than it used to be in a film time. There are a couple of companies, well, one company for sure that is matching the old sizes by the of the film. But the bigger, now we're getting bigger sensors and they're really expensive. I mean, these cameras are only for professionals and for professionals that really work on the high end of the spectrum of photography. And so this camera here, this Fusion, this for instance, is pretty much the same camera as any of these, because it's got this, actually it's a mirrorless camera. It's got the mirror inside, it's got a sensor inside, and it's all compact. It's a compact camera with everything in it. You point and shoot, okay? It's not a point and shoot, but you know what I mean. While on the other hand, you can buy a camera that does not have the sensor, but the sensor is detachable here. And that's called a digital back. Now, a digital back has got a, why would we want to remove the sensor from the camera? That's a really good question. Again, it's something that came from the film era, because back in the days we used to load films in here, and on these cameras we could only shoot from 10 to 12 photographs, which is quite incredible, right? Imagine doing, I used to do weddings with these 10 to 12 photographs, and then I was out of film. And then when you had an assistant, you had 4 or 5 of these, and the assistant would constantly load them up and pass them on to you as you photograph. But the other advantage is that I could load a black and white film, I could use a color film, I could do a few things. I could develop one film one way or another. Today, that film is gone, but I can change, I can move this body, this film back on a camera with a system, or I can attach this to a large plate camera, which we saw last time. I don't think I've got a picture here. No, I don't have a picture here of a large plate camera. But it's an advantage, because if I'm in the bracket of wanting to use or needing to use a plate camera and a medium format, I could put the digital back, use the digital back on the medium format when I'm maybe around and I need something that is more handy to use. They're quite big, but you know, they're not mastodontic, these cameras. And instead I use my tripod and I'm working on and I need the perfection and the movements of a plate camera, I can easily detach this digital back, put it on there and use that system. So again, it's very special. It's something really specific for not many photographers, but worth mentioning because it's out there. Oh, and lastly, if you own, like I do, one of these old Hasselblad or old cameras from the past, actually, let me quickly grab one. Like this. That's the digital back. Well, that's not a digital back, that's a film back. And Hasselblad came back. I could basically, they created a digital back that goes on my old film camera. Is it an ideal solution? Probably not. And there's very technical reason why that might not be the best, but it definitely will let me use my own system with a digital back. And for a lot of people, that's a great thing. That's a really great thing. Okay. So quick recap: crop sensor versus full frame. The smaller the sensor, the cheaper, the bigger and the larger, the more expensive, but also the better. And that includes going all the way up to medium format cameras. Then we have mirrorless versus reflex. Mirrorless today are probably today they are the most sold cameras, and they have a couple of specs higher than the DSLR when it comes to focusing and when it comes to previewing your exposure while you're framing, really. And those are the two major things today. But what is important to understand is that inside a camera, what you see here, that's the camera which has been assembled. The sensor is the same or better, different manufacturer, different things, different specs. However, you can find the same quality sensor in all of this system that we just looked, in the crop, in the full frame, in the medium format, and in the mirrorless versus DSLR. And so if you're afraid, if you heard someone saying this camera is better than that, it produces better photos, just be suspicious about it, or maybe ask, why is that person saying that? Ask if that person is with you, ask, why do you say that? Well, what's the reason? Clearly can't be the sensor, really. That person maybe likes the lens, how the lens renders better. That person maybe likes the colors, how the colors comes out of camera. So each manufacturer will render colors slightly different, and they have a little look, but nothing that you can't really adjust later on if you know how to do it and what to do. Of course, if I can choose a camera that gives me a look that I like and I don't have to retouch the look, that's great. I have always, don't worry about what camera you choose, because when you buy a professional level camera or a good, decent level camera, they all perform pretty much at the same level. Then it's up to you as a photographer to get the best out of them, okay? And so, as we talked before, mirrorless or DSLR, the thing to choose is going your way. I placed this camera here, which is a Zenit. I can't remember the code. It's a Russian camera. And this is the first camera I used to start taking photos with. And the reason I put it here is because it had, as you can see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 shutter speed plus B, so it makes 6, but B, I never used B. I didn't even have a tripod back then. So I had only 5 shutter speed, obviously with a film, and did not have an exposure meter. It had a solar panel on the front here with a little swinging arm that could kind of tell me, you got a little too much light here, not on the subject where I was. And I still make photos, and we can all make photos. And it is here as a little reminder that if you have a camera of $700 or if you have a camera of $5,000, it doesn't really matter. You are the driver, and you are the person that's pressing the button. So get inspired before buying a new camera. Just do what you can, work with what you got. If you're new, this makes more sense maybe, but if you already have a camera, don't be pressed on going off and buying a new camera. Only at some point, yes, if you want to, but don't worry too much about it. Focus on learning photography, on expressing yourself before focusing on what camera you can buy. That's my advice. Okay, moving on. So we watched this, the DSLR difference with a mirrorless camera. And we watched the performance of focus and image stabilizations. Oh, something really important. Last time we saw how the sensor works, and for those that have missed that, a sensor is a surface that is created by lots of pixels. Those pixels come from 3 different colors, and the famous RGB, red, green, and blue. You know, you might have seen 50 megapixel camera, 20 megapixel camera, 10 megapixel cameras, and the wide belief is that the more pixel you have, the better the camera performs. And that is true only to a point, because it is not all to it. So let's see more pixel versus larger pixel, what it makes, what it gives us. So the more pixel we have, the higher resolution we do have. Okay, so if I don't know, if I have a color gradient, or if I have a line, if I have something that is very tiny, I have now, let's say, I can count it so many little times. You know, the more I can count, the more resolution I can extract. And so a higher count on a sensor, it definitely helps with resolution. Yes, you have a better resolution, but the larger the pixel, the less noise we create. Okay, what's noise and where does noise come from? Noise in digital cameras come from 2 distinct things. One is the ability to photograph in low ISO or dark or a high ISO. So a lot of people are talking how performs well in dark scenarios or settings, and how much you can push the dark side in Photoshop and still not get the noise. Larger pixels have a better ability because of their surface to record light. And so they definitely always perform better in low light condition than the smaller pixel counterpart. I mean, they catch more light, and if they catch more light, they record whatever dim information better than the smaller ones. So if you are an astrophotographer and if you photograph at night, or you know, if you kind of feel is shooting a lot in dark environment, that's something I would consider. Do I go for a higher count cameras or less? Okay. Obviously, that becomes very special. It's as a specialty. If you're a specialty photographer, if you're a generic photographer, you should have variety or range, and so you might not want to think that way. But those are the consideration, and those are the options that we have today that we did not have back in the days. Okay, but the main things that noise comes from, and this is I think it's highly unspoken when it comes to the internet. Well, it is spoken, but not as much as it should be in relation to pixel size and pixel count, is the level of noise created by diffraction. And I'm going to explain what diffraction is. Well, diffraction is something super complicated. There's on Wikipedia, you can go and watch it out. But what does it create us? It creates a problem of noise, and I'll show you in a minute so what that noise looks like. But basically, when we have, do you remember the aperture that we talked last time, the windows that we have inside the lens that we can close and widen? When that window, the aperture setting, it's wide open, the light that comes from outside travels through and it bends slightly here as it touches the entrance, okay? And it reaches the sensor not in a linear, perfect way. The more we close that aperture setting, the more these problems occur. And this problem will create noise. And I'll show you what I mean. This is a Canon 1DS Mark II. The pixel size of this camera are 7.2. Oh my gosh, I forgot how to. Oh, okay, 7.2. It will come to my mind. Not right now. But they're small, they're really small, the pixel size. In every camera, you should look at the specs on how big the pixels are. And so what happened is that when diffraction, that bending that we saw, that's happening here, instead of creating a dot, if we photograph a dot, instead of creating a dot, it creates a little disc, okay? How big is that disc? Well, this is an aperture f2, which is quite open, maybe it's that scenario, okay? And from a dot, it creates a tiny disc. I mean, these are pixels. This is the size of the pixel, and the disc is smaller than the pixel, so we don't have problem. But look what happens. At f8, with these size pixels, I'm increasing the problem of diffraction to the point that the disc that I produce from a single dot overlaps more than one, gets out of that pixel size, is now touching one dot and should be within it with a pixel, is actually touching 5 pixels. And the more I close the aperture, the more confusion, the more disks, the more noise I create. Let me show you what this noise looks like. So here's a picture of 2.8, and we talked about it how last time we talked about how a wider open aperture settings, it gives you a very shallow depth of field. So by closing this aperture, we're increasing the depth of field and we're increasing sharpness and overall focus and sharpness, okay? And so that's what we're witnessing here. F2.8, out of the back, it's very blurry. F4, we're closing it a bit. It's getting a little bit more defined. F5.6, F8, it gets pretty sharp all around. F11 looks sharper, but at the same time, I don't know how well you can see. You can clearly see here. With that logic, the more we step down the aperture, so F11, 16, we're closing, remember, F22, F32, we should have everything in focus, you know, and that would be brilliant, that would be beautiful. The problem though, that those disks that I showed you here, once they reach a certain point, they overlap with one or the other because each pixel creates a disk, has its own problem. And that creates this fog. It's like going in a foggy day. And that's what happened. So at f32, one would expect to have the sharpest picture, but because of diffraction, we'll get this blurriness. Now, we always had this, even in the film time, we always had this, and it used to occur around f16. Okay, f16, because we didn't have pixel, it was not pixel, the sensor was, the film was just, didn't have pixels, okay, analogical versus digital. But with pixel, this effect is coming way, way earlier. I don't know what, I took this photo sample from the internet, but I seen photographs that, I mean, actually here you can see, this is an R5, okay? This is a Canon mirrorless full frame camera, and at f16 it's got smaller pixel because it's got more pixel. So it's got 50, I think this one has got 50 megapixel. Don't quote me on that, but it's got lots of pixels, many more than double than the Mark II here, the 1DX, 1DX actually now. And so the more the pixel, the smaller they are, because we have to fit them in this same surface. We have to fit more pixels, therefore they get smaller. And look at this, at f32, how many pixels we are contaminating. But so, Daniele, why is that useful? Okay, if you are shooting landscape, or you love landscape, or you love architecture, my big advice would be you probably would not want to go with a camera that has got many pixels. You can probably buy, back in the days, I mean, it's still in production, I think, the 1DX Mark III or Mark II, which was the top, it is the top DSLR of Canon, and then they never come with 50,000 megapixels. I think last time I checked was in the 20 range, okay? How can it be the top DSLR have less pixels than the second best, for instance? It's different purposes, okay? But that's great because an architecture photographer or someone that works in low light or someone that like that look, that is not hyper-focused on the resolution, crazy resolution, can choose the camera with less pixel and perform better on this way, on these ends. On the contrary, if you're a portrait photographer and you never shoot past f5.6, let's see what happens. I don't have the 5.6, I've got the 8, but you'll probably be okay with not having too many problems of diffraction because you never really step down. And so there are useful websites where you can find the size of the diffraction problem, the Airy-Disk is called, compared to the size of your pixel. If you're unsure, you can always go online and find these links and check it out for yourself. Worst case scenario, you can always, while you borrow the camera from the store or from a friend, if you're that technical, you can run an experiment like this. You can take something, put on a tripod, specific, make sure that exposure is constant, and you have a look at yourself. This is a more professional ways. These are charts that you can find, you can buy, you can print. Usually you buy them and they're very expensive because they print on aluminum or metals. But you can print one from the internet if you find a good resolution file, and it will still, you will start noticing what happens is that you photograph this on a wall that is well lit, evenly lit, and you start stepping down and you start noticing all the few things about your lenses and how it performs. And you will definitely see an increase of sharpness, and then at some point you will see that you're losing the sharpness due to diffraction. Some cameras do start that at f11, some cameras start that at f8, or some cameras start even earlier at f5.6, really depending on how many pixels you have on your sensor. So it gets very technical, and forgive me if I went a bit too technical, but when it comes to buy a camera, don't necessarily go for the highest count if you know that you will work you like to work with closed aperture setting at all time. I would advise you not to choose a camera that has less pixels. On the other hand, it's up to you. Try. See, that's what happens. You know, that's what happens. And I see another question here. What camera would you recommend for beginner? I'm not sure if I already answered that question while talking. Let me skip quickly back. We had talked before, I don't know what time you joined in, but we're talking about price. Price range is definitely something big. If you can afford, I mean, buy the best that you can afford all the time, that's great, you can't go wrong. But again, on beginners, you don't want to fork out too much money for something that you're testing out. For beginners, I would recommend crop sensor cameras. We talked about the difference between crop sensor and full frame today and last time. Crop sensor have the smaller sensors, and they generally are a step below the professional cameras. However, I was explaining that some crop sensors are brilliant. They just have the same quality sensor that the professional have. They're just smaller and designed for a different market. So if you depend on your budget all the time, but if your budget is it's a bit limited and you don't want to invest crazy, buy a crop sensor camera. If you trust, it really depends where you are. And I've spoken with lots of photographers. Someone will never buy secondhand, somebody would every day. I bought secondhand cameras and I bought brand new cameras, and I really know what to look for and where to buy and how to buy, possibly secondhand out of the shop, maybe with a warranty, or really depends. But since everyone is moving to mirrorless, as I suggested before, that there might be a chance to grab a great DSLR, a professional DSLR that maybe goes for almost the same money of an entry-level camera that is crop sensor. Really depends where you are at with your budget and what you like to do. But that definitely a beginner camera I don't know where you live, but a Canon crop sensor DSLR, you can find it for $500 to $800 compared to a full frame that goes from the 2000 onwards and so on. So the difference is quite remarkable. I'd rather buy a better lens than a better camera when I'm beginning. But we'll talk about lens in a second. Talk about lens, talk about that. I hope I answer. And if you have more questions, please write them in the chat box. So, where are we? Here, we're talking about lenses now. You ready for the next picture? Ta-da! Lenses. What a huge topic. This is a photograph of Canon lenses, and they include, there's all the photography lenses that they're doing when they took these photos, when someone took these photos, but they're also doing cine lenses. These are lenses for making videos and movies and all of that. So lenses, there are different branches, let's start from here. We talked last time, and I've mentioned it with my arms. Now there's a picture here. Lenses are normally defined in millimeters, and the lower the number, the wider the angle. And what do we mean by angle? That's, for instance, that's a 50 millimeter. It's a very wide, we call it a wide angle because it can capture that much, okay? And the longer the number, the narrower the angle of view that it can capture. And so we have three categories, and one are the wide angles, the normal lens, and the telephotos. If we then want to break them a bit more, we have the super wide angle and the super telephoto. I mean, super wide angle is something really recent. Back in the film time, with a 35 millimeter camera, 24 was the widest almost. There was a couple of lenses that were 20 millimeters, but nowadays, and then there were fisheyes. A fisheye lens is when you have a wide angle, but it's no longer corrected and makes this roundish look, which is not that useful. But skate photographers love it. They use it every day. That's the lens they swear by. But beside that particular industry of skate photography, I haven't seen any particular commercial use outside fine art or photography, okay? But the problem seems to be solved because now we have I think Canon does this 14 millimeter lens that is crazy, that is corrected. And so I guess we can call them a super wide angle now. Okay, so the wider the lens, okay, let me step back, sorry. Let me see what's the next slide. So that's exactly. Lenses there, the main difference that you see when you're buying a lens is it's prime lenses versus zoom lenses. What's the difference between a prime and zoom? So do you remember this picture that we just saw? A prime lens is a fixed length. It's a lens with a fixed focal length. So if you buy a 50mm prime, it will look that much. You'll see that out of your camera, and that's all you're going to see. If you want to get closer to your subject, you walk to your subject. If you need to frame more, you just need to step back and walk back. And so that's a prime lens. On the opposite, zoom lenses, you can zoom in and out and change the focal length. So let's say you have a 2470, which is not representative, let's say a 1550. That means that you can, with a touch of a couple of rotating, zooming out, you get to 50mm focal length, then you zoom in and you get all of this up to 50mm. And it's very convenient to have. Sometimes, well, it is always convenient to have. But so why do we still have prime lenses? Why don't we all go to zoom for zoom lenses? It's because prime lenses are definitely better quality than zoom lenses. And when I say that, definitely, let's put bracket, a top prime lens will outperform a top zoom lens. Obviously, a 3000 zoom lens versus a $50 lens that is prime, the zoom lens will still do a better job. Okay, so we need to compare pears with pears and apples with apples. If you compare top quality glass, when in a prime format or top quality zoom glass, the prime will outperform in sharpness, in rendering, in all of the aspects that the optics just get better. And it's because we're not going to technical, that's what happens. So, but the main downside is that now if I want to shoot, if I'm a wedding photographer, I need to buy maybe 3 or 4 lenses prime, because I'll buy a wide angle, I buy a few different lenses to cover my ground. While on the other hand, I could buy 1 or maybe 2 zoom lens and go that way. So what would I buy when I'm a total beginner? Total beginner, if you buy a crop sensor camera, like we mentioned before, they come with a kit lens. Actually, I think even if you buy professional, I've never done that, but I mean, I bought professional camera, but I never bought a kit lens. A kit lens is something that costs literally $50 that the manufacturer gives you, or you pay for anyway, to get you started, because you now just invested $700 on a camera that comes with no lens, and you wanted to spend $700, so for $750 you get this kit lens, and they're usually at 1855mm range. They're little zooms, and again, if you're just starting up, just get around with those lenses. But those lenses really don't work great. I mean, they're usually not that fast. They're not that sharp. They got all sort of issues, and I mentioned before, your camera will be soon outdated, but today lenses, if you buy a top quality lens, that top quality lens will always be a top quality lens. It does hold values very well indeed, compared to your body, for sure. So you buy a body, in 5 years' time, you basically sell it for free. Your lenses, they hold up value for much, much longer. I mean, top quality lens, they are top quality lens. And you don't need to sell them. That's the beauty, because if you're still using them, they hold the value, they hold the qualities, and they're great to use. So coming back to zoom versus prime, it really depends what you like, what's your type of work. If you are a wedding photographer, or you like to get into wedding photographer, I shot weddings with prime lens and film cameras, and then I shot weddings with zoom lens and digital. And I'll definitely go with the second option. It's just in a wedding or in any settings that so many things can happen so fast. Having the ability to zoom in and out, it is important. Or at least it is important to me in the way I shoot. I rather don't miss a moment or the ability to zoom in on a situation than not shoot. If I'm shooting architecture, or if I'm shooting something that is more slow, or it's not a wedding, it's not a photojournalistic type, I'll probably use primes. And don't get me wrong, I mean, there's tons of photojournalistic out there that still shoot with prime. Definitely in the past, they have been more than today. And they just walk. Get closer to the action if you need to. I mean, Kappa said if you're not close enough, your photo ain't good enough, something like that. And so it's really up to your style. Convenient-wise, zoom lenses are faster, but on the other hand, they're bigger, they're heavier, they're slower focusing, and they got, you know, they got their stuff too. Prime lenses are better in all quality. But we also, before we move on, the other important things to remember that every time we use one lens versus another, it changes the way our photo look. And so that's why I put these photos. These are famous photographs that were taken with a wide angle. Now, when I use a wide angle, the two reasons why people use wide angles, actually, usually it's one reason. They just need to get more in the frame, okay? Let's say I want to photograph interior. I photographed a lot of interiors, and I just need to get this room photographed. And I go with my shoulders at the wall. There's no space anymore for me to go back, and I cannot get this room in. And so what I do, I change lens, I put a wider lens, and I get to capture more. Okay, that's number one reason, is where you can't travel further, you need it. And the opposite is true. If you need to that close, let's say sport photographer, they can't walk onto the pitch together with the players, but they just need to zoom in to get closer to the action. Okay, but there's also another, and to me, more interesting aspect of using one lens versus the other, is that they change perspective. The way we use lens can dramatically and will dramatically change perspective. And before we go ahead, often we talk about the normal lens, and for a full frame camera or 35mm camera, that's considered a 50 millimeter lens. And even if mathematically speaking, it should be a 43, but that's complicated. We won't go there, but it's a 50, okay? And what does that mean? That if I look at reality without a camera, I see perspective. I see a chair, and I see something, and I see something, and I see the space in between them, and it looks like they look. When I put my 50mm camera, yes, I'll see less of the vision because my periphery is less, but the perspective of those objects is the same. So the gap between the chair and the size of the chair compared to the table and all of that stays the same. That's why it's called normal lens, meaning that it projects or it shows reality with the same depth, the same perspective that our eyes see it. When we go to a wide angle, that perspective is extremely exaggerated. When we go to a super telephoto, that perspective is super compressed. And I've got some photos here to show you that, to show you this. And photographers will use lenses to another to enhance or not to those effects. We'll see more about this. When it comes to portrait, it is wrong, it's considered wrong to use a wide angle lens, because look what happens here. We have a leg, a shin, that is the size of all the torso here. And that perspective is being distorted by the use of a wide angle, low. So the photography is quite low, it's pointing the camera up. But because the leg is closer to the lens, it looks disproportionately bigger than anything that's behind, okay, that's further away. And I'm pretty sure that the head here has been photoshopped to look bigger, because look at the shoulder there. With this original photo, I'm pretty confident the head was too tiny, but the photographer really liked the look and it was going for the look, and then adjust the size of the head a little bit. And there's a beautiful series, there's a lot. And again here, that's less apparent than here, but take a second to consider the size of this hand. Well, that's the photographer taking the photo. Look at the size of the hand. It's bigger than the head and the shoulder together. And this is because the wide angle, again, distort reality and perspective, making things that are closer way bigger than the things that are back. Same here, look at the size of the shoes. This is another photographer. Look at the size of the shoes. This fit as big as the whole body. Incredible. But what a beautiful photo. And we talked about interiors, okay, without a wide angle, but one of the complaints when you, I don't know if you ever rented a house and you look at the photo, they all look, oh, look how big and spacious this house is. Then you go, you check it out, and it's the half of the size of the picture. And you think someone is trying to scam you. I don't think they're trying to scam you, they're trying to show you the room. And as a consequence of using a wide angle, the space between things get elongated again, because the chair at the foreground, look at this, is considerably bigger than the chair here at the midground. If this chair was at the end, it would be very, I mean, this is a sofa chair and it's smaller than a chair here. Of course, even in natural life, when we look at things in the back, it gets smaller, but this really does that trick faster and making look this building way bigger than it is. Again, another sample. I took a lot of photos of it, chosen a lot of photos of it because look at the size of this thing. It's massive. Again, that's an aesthetic choice that you can have, that you can make. No matter if you have a crop sensor, whatever, no matter what camera you have, you can make this. Every camera can give you this result. Same with building. These corridors look probably way longer than it actually is. And look at the size of these columns. Look how small it gets down here. And we haven't traveled like kilometers. They're quite close compared to what they look like. Again, the perspective is exaggerated by the use of wide angle. Same here. I mean, you've been in the tube. I reckon, I presume you've been in an underground station. They don't look that long. I mean, they're long, but they don't look like that tunnely. And here, if you use a wide angle of the crowd, look what happens. This is the foreground is massive. This guy must be maybe what, a foot in front, 50 centimeters in front. But look at the size of the head. It's dramatically changed. And by the time you go to the third line, which you probably hear, it's uncomparable. That's how tiny they get very fast. And so on the contrary, if we step away, and we zoom in with a long lens, look at this, the hand and the head and the hand, the three first heads, they don't look different. Look at the different, okay? And so using a super telephoto lens or telephoto lens compressed perspective does right the opposite, bring things closer. So while the wide angle brings things apart, the telephoto brings them closer. And so, do you remember the columns before? Now we go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 columns. They pretty much look alike. They're compressed. These mountains look relatively close to one another, and they are not. I mean, there's valleys in between these mountains. And look at the tree compared to the mountain. And now look at the tree compared to the mountains. Yes, it's a different location, but I can tell that this is using a telephoto lens that compress the two together, while this is not. This is using a wide lens, and they look very far apart. Look at this, the same place. Look at the size of the tractor, the height of the tractor compared to the building, okay? Or the size of this tractor compared to this building. And look at it now. Look how big the tractor is compared to the building. The tractor is bigger. An installer, if I Photoshop this on top of the building, it cover and it will surpass the height. Yes, the tractor is in the same spot. The photographer changed lens and they changed lens and position. But definitely the use of different lens made this perspective change so dramatically different. So it's something that is beautiful. I mean, as a photographer, I say, oh my God, I can use perspective so dramatically to change my photograph. So if you're out there and you like the tractor and you like this building, explore, go very close, use a wide angle, see what that gets you, where it gets you. On the other hand, step away, walk far, and look at it back and zoom in and see how that changed. And that's magic, that's magical. I will talk more about how to approach photography in later classes. And here, a mistake, what is considered a mistake. This is a same person. I know it looks someone totally different because it is so distorted. This is a shooting with a wide angle, filling the frame, of course, and this is shooting with a probably normal, a 70 millimeter or 50 millimeter, maybe 100 millimeters, but no longer than that. And that's what it creates. So when it comes to portraiture, unless you want to be creative like the first photos that we saw, let me bring them back up here. Unless you want to be creative and do something like this, there is a wrong and right lens to use. If you're just trying to portray a person as it is, don't use a wide angle, okay? And don't use a super telephoto. Anything from 50 to 100 is a good range, okay? On a full frame camera. Wide angle, look at this. Look at the size of this tire compared to the car next to it. Again, it is using a wide angle and it gives this drama. It's very dramatic. I like the wide angles a lot. And here's a similar photo. Look at the tire here. It's normal size compared to the car. And again, and look at these cars are one next to the other in the next lane, and they look dramatically one bigger than the other further away. Same happens here, the one next to the other, but they just look more closer to one another, don't look that far. Again, remember, the wide angle makes us see things as they're further away than they actually are. And on the opposite, telephoto lens compress these spaces. And here's what I found. Look on the internet. This is a simple photos shot at 25 millimeter. Look at the distance between those trees. Now, same tree shot at 90 millimeter lens. So we got 25. Look at the spacing here, 90, and then 180. Look at the different. Look, the tree at the back at the beginning, we can't even see them. They get really tiny. But by the time we shoot with 180. They get really close. Okay, look at the space between the first and the second. That probably is the one we can see the most change. Look, and this sums up this the difference between a long lens and a short lens. Okay, so a little recap about lenses. We have two main categories, and that would be prime lens versus zoom lenses. And the advantage of having one or the other really depends on your style of shooting and what you're photographing. Prime lens perform better, but you need to change every time lens, and you need to buy more lenses. And they're smaller though to carry, but if you need to carry 3 lenses, you know, the weight probably is the same than a zoom lens, or maybe even more. Really depends on what lenses you're buying. On the opposite, you have zoom lenses that can change focal length, and they are very, I would say, easy to use. Well, they're more flexible. They come with a lot of more flexibility and possibilities. But something that I didn't mention, I wouldn't use a zoom lens if I could walk generally to a place. If I need to get closer and I can get closer, I will probably do that and use a prime lens. A zoom lens is not a justification to be lazy. Forgive me that term. Oh, okay, I just want to be sitting here and I just zoom in and out. That's not the intended purpose, at least, okay? And then we saw the main difference between the wide angles, normal lenses, and telephotos or super telephoto lenses. But not only for the fact that the wide lenses, they capture more, and the super telephoto, they bring us closer to the subject in a way. But we really went in to look at the aesthetic differences that they produce. And we saw how wide angles really exaggerate, or yes, they do exaggerate perspective, showing things on the foreground way bigger than the things in the background, dividing the space, almost putting more space in between subjects. And the opposite is true for super telephoto lenses, that they compress perspective, showing us things that like they would be closer than they actually are. Okay, and this is a great sample from the wide angle to a moderate telephoto. I mean, to 180, it's not even a super telephoto. It's a telephoto, but that changes. Now, I put these little things here. That's a 600 millimeter lens. It's called a super telephoto. There's not a fixed definition, but from 300 millimeters onwards, some say less, 200, 300, who cares? they are called super telephoto. Up to that numbers, up to 200, 300 telephotos. Over that are super telephotos. And lenses like these, I don't know if you've ever seen them, but they're huge, mastodontic. They're heavy as hell. And you don't walk with these things lightly. Usually, a lot of sport photographers look at the matches or the Olympic were not long ago. All the photographers, any sport event, they sit there, they stand there with this, not the tripod, but with a monopod, and they don't move much. I mean, when they do, they really carry these things. They're not moving and taking photos. And they're extremely expensive. I mean, from 15,000 onwards, they're extremely expensive. And that's why only very few people have them, and only specialized photographers do have them. Sport, maybe birds photographers, and well, I'm sure there are other photographers that use them, but very specialized lens. What if you'd like to play with such a long lens, but you don't want to spend 15, of course you don't want to spend 15,000. I mean, of course, never know, but it doesn't make sense to play with a lens and spend that much money. But if you're curious about using a long lens, then what you see on the right, it's a cut dioptric lens, which is a super telephoto lens. I mean, this is in compare, it's a 500 millimeter lens, this is 600. This comes in 500 or 1000 millimeter lens, which is not much bigger than the 500. And you can grab this for a couple of $100 versus 15,000. And there's a trick, of course, to it. I mean, it's not all great and shiny, and it doesn't perform nowhere near as good as it, but I'll tell you what it is. And it's a curious little things worth noting for people that are new to photography, and they once need that lens, and they don't want to rent it or buy it. They just buy one of these. So what's the peculiarity of this lens? How do they get to reach that length and focal length? They have a mirror inside. So this is the front lens, the front glass, and usually you just see glasses all the way through, okay? This lens has got a black hole, let's call it, when you look at it from outside. It's got a black dot, quite a big dot. I mean, look at this. And what happens inside, and that dot gives you these effects. And it gives you, that's a famous donut effect. If you have a dot of sparkling something, any dot will look like a donut because of that famous hole. The famous dot, the black dot. Anything that is sharp, and if this was a forest at the back or dark and didn't have points of lights or pointy things, you wouldn't see the donut. So don't be worried. Oh, I cannot use this lens. This is an exaggerated example of this donut effect, okay? But how does it work? This is the front element. The light travels through. Then there is a mirror here that bounces the image back to the black dot, because on one side is a black dot, on the other has got another mirror that then send the photo through your sensor. And this travel back and forth makes up for the focal length of all these longer. I mean, the longer the lens, the focal length, the longer the lens physically needs to be. But in this case, they reduce the size by bouncing back and forth, and that calculation, adding up all these back and forth, makes up for the length missed lens. That's the principle behind the lens, okay? What's the downside? Well, beside the donut effect, that if you don't like or want them, funny enough, I've met a fashion photographer that used for a couple of, he got one, used it for a couple of shoots, that he wanted this effect, then unsold it. And you know, some people might want this effect. You might have the odd job once in a while that really requires this effect. The downside is that's got less quality, considerably less quality, and it is a fixed aperture, and usually it's a f8. You cannot change it, because imagine now if you had an aperture ring here, you start closing and you just black the whole things out. You can't close on the mirror in the inside, okay? So do not have aperture settings. It's a fixed aperture settings. It might even say here, oh, this is a 400 millimeters. It's an f8, okay? So, you know, you'll have to work all with the shutter speed. So it's got its downsides, but I've played with a couple of those. It's fun. It was fun. Never used them professionally, but it's worth mentioning there. Okay. What else do we have in the range of lenses? So we've seen we saw this catadioptric lens, but there's also another thing that is called teleconverter. and different brands do them. This is a Canon one, there's a Time 2. And what does it mean? That if you have a 50mm lens and you put this in between the lens and the camera, so you have your camera, you put a teleconverter, then you put your lens on, then it times your focal length times 2 in this case. So your 50mm becomes a 100mm lens. So if you don't have the budget to go and buy more lenses, and let's say if you have a 100mm lens, you put this on, it becomes a 200mm lens, and so forth. Is it ideal? I mean, it's cheap enough. It's way cheaper than buying a 200mm lens for that matter. But is it worth it? Really depends. If you can buy a lens, great, buy a lens. That slows down your autofocus system. It loses light, so it makes 1 or 2 stop darker, and that's a quite technical things for beginners. But basically, your shutter speed will have to be longer because moving the lens further, the light now has to travel longer, and you lose light. You lose light, and so it is not ideal. But again, if for now and then, or try playing out and increase, instead of if you have a budget and you bought 2 lenses, buying one of these increases your range by extending it doubles. And so it could be something for beginners really to play with. Or if you have a 200mm lens and you need a 400mm lens for that odd job, definitely that could be a solution. But if you constantly need the 400mm lens, you probably this won't cut the chase for it. Excuse me. Accessory, what else do we need or can we buy? Now, it is important to remember that photography, you can go crazy. You can buy every little gadget is out there. Someone did it better than others, and there are gadgets for everyone, for every taste, of every color, of every size and shape. Do you need them? Well, I don't. And in this little lecture, I put the most important things that I consider that could come helpful. There's a ton of other things that is helpful, but I'm not putting here because it really depends on what you do and whatnot. But these are the main things that are fun to play as well. I mean, the cathode optic lens is it's a fun thing for me to put, and if someone wants to shoot with a super telephoto now, it can quite affordably, you know. You can find out about cables and cleaning kit and all of these things elsewhere. I mean, go or ask me if you have a specific question, ask me. But here's a list of the most important things that I would invest money in, and which I've actually used as well. And one of the top of the list is macro photography, how to make macro. And macro photography does not necessarily mean shooting bugs, especially if you're afraid of bugs. You never want to do it. Why would I want to do that? But macro photography comes comes useful many times, from still life, shooting jewelry, to shooting animals, to shooting, I don't know, anything. I mean, I've seen people doing macro of body parts or fine art, and it is possible to do lots of different things with macro photography. Now, there's the expensive way and there's a cheaper way to obtain macro photography done. And today I'm going to explain you a few different tricks. So number one, it's buying a macro lens. A macro lens is a lens that is the ability to focus closely. If you buy a lens, it actually it says how close you can focus with it. Okay, past that distance, you're no longer able to focus. A macro lens, on the other hand, can focus very close. You can touch the subject and you still be able to focus. Okay, and that is the most expensive because you buy a lens that needs to be a macro. Having said that, you can still use your macro lens as a normal lens, and usually a prime lens. Okay, you can buy 50 macro, 100 macro, and you use them as a prime lens. The downside is the macro lens is usually slower out of focusing. So it really depends again on what is your field of work, how fast focusing you need, and all of that jazz. However, you can multitask lens when it's a macro lens. There are some telephoto lens or zoom lens that do have a macro function too, but usually the prime lens are the one really that get the macro done. Okay. The other way that you can actually change any lens into a macro by means of adding extension tubes or bellows. We'll talk about extension tube for a second. Basically, these are empty tubes. The difference with the teleconverter has glass in it. Let's say it's a magnifying glass that in this case doubles your focal length. The extension tubes are empty. They only have some electronics here to make sure that your aperture still works, pretty much, okay? Or you autofocus, some of them, well, most of them you lose autofocus. I think that some of them you might carry out of focus. I'm not entirely sure. Every brand is different. However, what they do, they enable you, once you put one of these on, your lens no longer focuses on normal distance, but if you get closer, you start noticing that you can actually focus at a certain distance, very, very close. And the longer the tube, the closer you focus. And so they normally come in a set of 3 because you can put this one, but maybe that's a bit too long. You just need a shorter one to get to the distance, focusing distance that you desire. And so there are kind of many combinations. You can put 1, 2, 3, or 4 with this, or 4, 5 with this, and 6 combination, I think. And you just work out all the combination, and that's a fixed limit of combination. Generally speaking, that's plenty of combination, and that's a relatively cheap way to do micro photography. The downside of these compared to macro lens is that, as we mentioned before, losing light. We are doing the same here. We're extending the distance the light has to travel, and we lose a considerable amount of light. So let's say that you might even lose 2 stops, 3 stops of light. You let to count how long they are, and the manufacturer will actually tell you how much light you lose. So again, if shutter speed is essential, that's something to consider. However, I want to say that people that shoot micro photography, they shoot on a tripod, and the shutter speed is not probably the #1 concern. The bellow, what's the bellow? The bellow is the same as this, but instead of having a fixed number of combination, you can shorten and lengthen this bellow, and now you have an infinite number of combination within the given length of the bellow. Okay, that's beautiful. I really like it. It's a neat solution. And it does pretty much the same. Then you have the cheapest of the option, which is a reversing ring. Now, if you haven't ever seen this, I actually played with reversing ring, and I've played with extension tube and reversing ring at the same. You basically start building a microscope with this. But how do they work? You know, lens at the front. Let me find the lens quickly. Yeah, here it is. You can probably see here there is a protector 67mm. Well, this is a filter that someone mounted on this lens. Now you can buy a filter that mounts on the lens, but on the other side of the filter has the bayonet, or has the mechanism, has the hooks, or I'm not sure how to call them, to actually attach to the camera itself. And so what you see here is a lens that has been mounted, the mount, probably that's how it's called, mounted the other way around. So there's a filter that screws on the front of the lens, and the mount allows you to reverse the lens. Now, and instantly when you do that, you have a huge magnifying glass. You can closely focus, and but you can't, like the bellow or the rings, extension tubes, not the rings. With the extension tube and the bellows, you can change the distance, you can play with it. Reverse the ring, you're stuck with that distance only, okay? Unless you keep doing stuff to it. And it's really cheap. I mean, I don't know how, but be surprised if it costs more than $10, you know. It's really the cheapest way of creating a macro photography. The second cheapest way is to buy close-up filters. And I play with them, and again, if I'm not doing super commercial, but I just want to play and do macro photography of leaves or stuff around, or even for fine art, these are perfectly fine in my opinion. And what they are filters that mount on the front of your lens, but you keep your lens the way it should work. And they, as you see, there's close up 1, 2, 3. The close-up 10 I never played with. I think that probably gives a lot of distortion. But basically what they do, they are magnifying glasses. So all of a sudden you see bigger, you can get closer, and you can focus things closer. And again, you can step them up together. So you can use the number 1, which is it provokes the least of a close-up ability, and plus 10, the time 10x here is definitely the strongest one. But you can put the 1 and the 2 together, gaining a 3, or you can put the 2 and the 4 together, gaining a 6 level, things like this. So these again are quite inexpensive, and if you're not sure you want to do macro photography, it's a fun things to have maybe in your kit. And we looked about the macro, and this is a macro lens, okay? So remember, 5 ways to do macro. 1 is to buy a macro lens, 2 is to buy extension ring, 3 bellows, 4 reversing ring, 5 close-up filters. I definitely, for most people, the extension tube and the bellows would suffice if you're not using macro constantly, and just the odd one out. These ones are perfect. But the really odd one out, I mean, that's the once time or very little for fun. Try this close-up filter. I would not recommend buying a reversing ring. It's just not great. More accessories. Another important things about photography and accessories, this is probably, they're filters. Filters comes in different colors, size, shape, materials. Some of them are plastic, some of them are glass, some are so expensive that you think they're made of gold, but they're not. What are filters used for? In the past, we used filter for special effect and pretty much anything you could think of. Don't know if you ever saw the picture with, yeah, okay. We had filters that they were scratched, so that when we put them on at nighttime, the street light would come with like a stars or things like this, and they were pretty not the best. But back in the days, we didn't have Photoshop, and creativity was quite mechanical things to well, people experimented with all sorts of things with filters. But when digital, and especially you had we used to have films that had a color temperature that was fixed. You could buy tungsten at 3200 Kelvin, or daylight at 5500 Kelvin. And that meant that if you had a daylight film in your camera and you went to shoot indoor, all of a sudden your colors are totally off. So filters that would come really handy, and you put what you used to put, you put this color filter in front of it to correct the colors of the light, so that to bring that to the same level of your film you are using. But with digital, of course, you have white balance, you have automatic white balance, and you can correct that. And if you're not sure about what I've just mentioned about tungsten and daylight and Kelvin, it is quite technical for this lecture, but if you do have a camera, go on your white balance, try to take the same photos of the same place, at the same shutter speed and everything, but changing all the white balance. And you'll be surprised, a color will change dramatically. And here's the beauty. I've actually used on purpose wrong white balance sometimes to create special effect. I mean, I can go and change the colors in Photoshop, but if I want to pre-visualize how it looks straight on camera, that's something that you might be able to have fun with. Generally speaking, automatic white balance is great. Back in the days, we just didn't have that function, and filter went on to help us. And so of all the filters that are there, a lot of them are not used, well, they don't really, we don't need them much anymore, but there are a couple that are really essentials, or really essential there. They come handy still today. Number one would be, one of those would be polarizing filter. A polarizing filter is a filter that lets you do this. I mean, this is probably not the best sample, but it's good at showing what a polarizing filter does. It cuts away all the reflection from one side. You can change, let me see if I got a picture. Do I have a picture? I don't. Shame. Basically, it's a dark gray filter, maybe it's this one, that you can rotate Yeah, polarizing filter, yes, slim polarizing filter that you can rotate. When you rotate this filter, you mount it first and then you keep rotating over and over again if you like to. And you look through, you see anything that's got a reflection, including a tabletop. Tabletop do come with reflections depending on where the light is. And if the reflection changes the colors, you don't like the reflection, or there's you're shooting through a car. The subject is sitting inside a car, and you're outside, and you want to do a portrait, and there's this reflection of the building next door, or sunlight, or something is reflecting on the windshield, and you can't take a proper photo. You use a polarizing filter, and by rotating it, you will observe that at some point the reflection will likely go away or diminish very much. And that's what it's used for. And sensational use of the polarizing filter is to cut away the reflection of the water and showing what is under. And so these photos are possible mostly with the use of a polarizing filter, okay? Including these. I mean, yes, let's say that is possible with a polarizing filter. It really depends on the condition and so many things, but it is very easy to achieve these results with the use of polarizing filters. Another filter that is very well used and is loved by landscape photographers is what we call ND filters. And ND stands for neutral density. And I think I mentioned last time, yes, I did on the first lecture. ND filter is like putting sunglasses on your camera. Why would we put sunglasses on our cameras? It's if I like to obtain a slow shutter speed photography in silky water like this, blur out the movement. I might need a 10-second exposure for this. Okay, I'm just shooting. Let's say a 10-second exposure, and I already have and so that means I've got a lot of light, and my photo is overblown. So what do? I take my aperture and I close it all the way to f32. I really close it. Okay, and I'm blocking off as much light to compensate. I've got so much light coming from the shutter speed, and I need to close it down to bring the exposure good. And I do that, but if I do that, I still do that, maybe the photo is still too bright. It's not enough. So what do? I go to the ISO setting and I make sure that the ISO is the lowest, 100 or 50, depending on your camera. And after I check that, my photo is still too bright. And now I've got one option. Either I don't make the water silky and I go maybe to 2 seconds, which makes the water a little blurred, not really silky, or I put sunglasses on to cut the rest of the light off. And that's what an ND filter is used for. So by placing this ND filter, I'm basically cutting down all the excess exposure, and now I can play with my shutter speed and say, okay, 10 seconds, yeah, I can do this because all the excess light is filtered away from this ND filter. And it's ND, neutral density, because the aim of this filter is to cut down the quantity of light, but not to change its color. And a good ND filter will not give you supposedly not giving you any cast of change of colors, okay? And you can find a polarizing filter from $10 to, I don't know, crazy much, 200, I don't know, maybe more. Tell me if you know. But ND filter, I've seen ND filter with system, and they're very expensive. Let me show you what I mean. A classic filter comes with one size, and you screw to the size of your lens. So each lens has a diameter at the front that you can read. This is a ring that is on here. Okay, let me take that out. Okay, that's a filter. I can put that here, and it's got a certain size. If my lens would be bigger, it wouldn't work. I need to buy a bigger filter, okay? And a lot of photographers used to have different sizes, or you can buy adapter ring. So let's say I have a larger filter, and if I buy a reducing ring sort of things, I can mount the larger onto smaller lenses. Or I can go and buy something fancier that is a universal way of a universal bracket, I'm not sure how it's called, but a portafilter or something that goes onto many different lenses, And then I have these large glasses or plastic filters that I can slide in and out. So that would be a neutral density filter there. These are black and white filters, and I will go in a moment. And these are gradual filter, I think they're called. And you can slide them in and out, so that you can use these filters on any other lenses. So as you can see, these don't screw, but they just need this system to go on. And there are different systems for all budgets out there. Okay, you can buy filters from 5 to 500, let's say. And so let me check. And the filter black and white filters. Okay, this is a famous photos of Ansel Adams. And he writes specifically about this photo because it was a haha moment for him. And he says that he used the red filter for this photo. Now, beside the beauty of these photos, and this is just a dead copy from the internet, but one that is new to photography might observe the fact that this sky, it's black. And these photos taken long before computers and was not photoshopped to be black. And so black and white photography, you can change the contrast of colors by using different filters. And yellow, orange, and red filters are the one that are most used. And red being the strongest filter and yellow being the lightest filters. And they basically tend to make blue, in this case, dark, and change the overall appearance of the scenes that you're taking photos of. And so if you see a big red filter at a second-hand market and you think, oh, I might buy this for my DSLR, that work for film cameras on black and white. Actually, that's a good question. Would that work on digital cameras? I don't know, because I haven't tried it and I haven't used them. But those very red cast, orange or yellow, they were invented for film black and white photograph. I see a question here. Is there a way to distinguish filters quality other than price? That's a great question. The great prices difference, yes. But I'm not sure it is worth it to pay up for what is described as good filter. Okay. Okay, you can't trust anything that people say is on the internet when they're trying to sell you something. I mean, that's my big word of advice. There are a couple of reputable brands that you can trust. I mean, Lee Filter, L-E-E, it's a very famous brand that do glass filter. There is a Japanese brand, Oya. I can, if you write us an email, I can put together a list of brands that I know that they're famous. Now they don't come to mind. There's a Japanese one, there's a French one. And so if you're looking for quality, I wouldn't go on the internet or Alibaba, AliExpress, the $5 one, no, despite whatever they say, because we don't know. I mean, there's no way that you can tell. No, I'm not a physicist. I don't put those glasses under a microscope. I wouldn't be able to. So if you're in a budget for high quality filter, and now you have an unknown brand to a very good famous brand that does glass for 50 years, I would definitely go with the brand one and the price one. I wouldn't know how to do otherwise. That's what I'll do. Another question, can you tell about gradient filter with some example? That's another great question. I don't think I have an example for that. Let me check. I don't think I did put it. But I can explain you what they do. No, I don't have one. So gradient filter, let me bring them back. As you can see, they have half of it, it's colored, and half of it is neutral. Okay, and tend to not do anything or very little. And what is it used for? I mean, even this is quite obsolete, I think, because with Photoshop, they're still used to. What you do is that you have a system like this, you put in front of your lens. Let me stop share for a moment. Stop share so that you can see better. So yes, you have a filter. Usually the filter is it goes in front one way or the other, and it is the same across the entire surface and gives you the same result at the back. But these graduated ones, half of it gives a color cast, and you can slide it in, and it's usually used for landscape photography. Let's say you have an horizon and you have a blue sky and you have, I don't know, water under, and you want that sky to be more orangey, and just it's a sunset and you want to emphasize that sunset. So you grab your graduated filter, you're probably using a tripod at this stage, and you are sliding in the graduated filter up to the orange line, kind of overcome a little bit the horizon line. And you will notice, if you take a photo with or without, you will notice that the sky will be more orange. So that's what they were meant to, and I'm sure you can creatively use them for many other applications. Maybe you can use on a portrait, well, why not? But that's what they're meant for, that's what they do. The bottom half does not do anything really, maybe cuts off some light because there's some natural density going on there, but the top one cuts off the light, but also changes the colors. And you can choose different colors, and you can use them. The disadvantage is if they need a pretty standard horizons. You know, if you have a building, a tall building, and you're trying to do that, maybe half of the building gets an orange cast and the other half doesn't, while you might want it to give an orange cast to the background of the building. And but if you're using Photoshop, or if you're using Camera Raw, or if you're using any software, then you can graduate the filter in a second and change them. I wouldn't recommend using graduated filter today, not much, unless you want to experiment, of course, and which experimentation is always very welcome, very welcome. Let me see, there was another question. Are they the same as polarizing field and somewhat? No, they are not the same. So if you're intending, if the gradient filter do the same job as the polarizing filter, not at all. Again, the graduated filter, it's meant to give a cast of color only to a specific part of the frame. The polarizing filter spins and is meant to eliminate reflection out of surface. I don't know if my glasses are catching some light and glares. With a polarizing filter, you could remove those glares because by spinning it, okay? So no, they're not the same. Back to the presentation, share, okay. Now let's see, we're almost at the end. Cleaning cloth, bringing, cleaning cloth, I know I shouldn't say that, but I know what I do. I'm pretty good with my gears. But a very soft t-shirt will pretty much could do the tricks of cleaning a lens very gently. You need to do that and clean it. However, I strongly suggest to buy a cloth, a specific cloth, a paper cloth. I don't like the paper cloth because you need to use them and throw them away. But you can buy cloths that you can wash them later on. And obviously there is a lens hood and a lens cap. The lens hood used to come with every lens you bought, but the photography, I don't know, it's not only photography, but now you have to buy the extra. Unless you buy a prime lens, really top of the range lens. If you buy any mid-range, low-range lens, they don't put the hood anymore. You're allowed to buy the extra. And do you need to buy? Yes, you need to buy a lens hood. What is a lens hood for? What is it? Here's the lens hood. I will come to that in a moment. A lens hood, it's important to take away all the excess light that is hitting your front lens. So let me show you this again. This camera doesn't have a lens hood right now. And if there is a light there, and what happens is that, when we were, I don't know, but when I was kids, we used to have given this camera, and it was always written, never shoot against the sun, always the sun at your back. That was it. And I think that ruined a generation of people, or many generations, because we believed that was against the law to shoot against the sun. When in reality, again, shooting against the sun creates a beautiful effect. And shooting against the sun creates beautiful effect also because some of the light spills inside and gives you these glares and is very creative and whatnot. But back in the days, I guess we didn't want to waste the film. Kodak didn't want to know that they were doing bad quality film, so they always told us never to do that. And we followed. Anyway, a lens hood, it's there to protect any unwanted sun spill on your lens, because when the sun hits your lens, it glares off the results. Sometimes just very little, it creates little noise, it creates little fog, and sometimes really badly, you see it really glares and funky green sign or red things, and it's not pleasant. So a lens hood is there to minimize that possibility. And please, if you have a lens hood, I have another, no, it's not here, it's upstairs. Don't use it the other way around. That really gives you off. You're not professional. Okay, we don't need to be professional, but it's nothing worse than a lens hood mounted the other way around. Just use it the normal way, and always use it. Always. Yes. Lens hood comes different sizes, different shapes, and each lens needs to have its own, because a wide angle lens, seeing so much, cannot use, it needs to use a wide angle lens hood, which are very thin and small. Because what happens is that the wide angle is so wide that it actually catches the corners of the hood. I've seen people buying cheap hood off the internet, mounting on the lens, and then seeing catching the corners. If that happens, not too bad, take some sandpapers, take a file them off slowly by slowly, make a good job until you don't see the edge anymore. Or just go and buy their own branded hood and you never have that issue, okay? So let me share the screen again. And we come to the last part of it for today. Oh, no, almost part of it is tripods. Tripods are quintessential to photographers. Yes, who knows me and followed me at school in New Zealand, he used to run this beautiful lecture that student hated me for, which was I asked them to bring all the tripods and I grabbed a big bin and put it in the front and then just pick the tripods that I thought that needed to go in the rubbish and put them actually in the rubbish. People got really offended, but it was sometimes, it was very jokingly, we told them that it was a joke, but I told them it was a joke. And a funny story that once a student came to me and he was really upset and he said, why did you throw my tripod? I said, because your tripod is not good. You're risking ruining your gear. And he didn't really get it. Then in halfway the term, he bought a brand new camera, a brand new lens, a professional full frame camera. And first things he went home and put it on a tripod. And as soon as he let the hand go, the camera snapped off the head. And luckily for him, he had the straps around his neck and the camera fell safely against his chest. Now, the next day he came home, he came to school, to college, and he told me, it was like this, he said, Daniele, I need to apologize for what? For something about the tripod, but that happened like 3 months ago. And he told me the story. And so then he got it. And so the tripod that I've chosen here is one of those dangerous tripods. If you see that the little handle is plastic, this only one handle, these are the worst case scenarios, a $10, $20 tripod. I mean, some of them cost $70, $80, $120 because they're just chunky and heavier, but they're just chunky and heavier plastic thingy that are not safe to use unless you really use a point and shoot super lightweight cameras. Okay, a tripod goes like this. The heavier the tripod is, the better. The problem with the heavy tripods, I mean, they get really heavy. Studio, we'll see. Now, I don't have photos of the tripods here, only this one there. The heavier the tripod gets, the better it does the job, obviously. However, you can buy carbon fiber, so a carbon fiber tripod doesn't almost make sense. Okay, and I have a carbon fiber tripod. It doesn't almost make sense because it's getting lighter. Why would I have a lighter tripod? But there is something, stability versus portability. How easy is to bring these things around, how stable it is, and the opposite. The more easy is to get these things around, the less stable it's gonna be, and the less will perform. The heavier the tripod is, the better it will perform, and but the more difficult it gets to carry around. I mean, we have camera stands. They are actually cast iron giant things on wheels. Obviously, they're not meant to be carried outside. They're just meant to be wheeled in the studio. But that's on the really far end of the scale of heaviness in tripods. I'm going to put this in the chat. A good reference, we said, what tripod do I need to buy? A good all-around, easy to carry, but still strong enough, heavy enough, would be, let me see if I can put that in the chat. To everyone, wait a second, in meeting, it would be the 055 from Manfrotto. Manfrotto. Now, I'm not making money out of Manfrotto, and not because, no, it's not spelled like that. There you go, Manfrotto. There you go. Is just what I recommend. And they do 055 Pro, blah, blah. They've done this tripod for, I don't know, 50 years, and they have different models and different variation of it. But if it has 055, it's the one I mean, because they are of a good weight, but they're still not that heavy to be carried around, okay? Okay, someone that just bought this 2 months ago, that's great, with a ball head. We'll come into the head in a second. Yes, Elizabeth is suggesting 10 minutes, maybe take some question. You meaning now? Well, if you do have question, well, we are at the end. Maybe let's finish. We're just on the last topic, which is the head of the tripod. And then we can see if there are more questions. So Himanshu just said he bought that tripod. Great, that's a great choice. Here's something. It is expensive. Yes, it is a good branded tripod, and photography stuff are expensive. But if you're not if you're beginning, you're investing in cameras, you're investing in lens, and you now need to invest on a tripod as well, and you say, oh my God, where does this end? But here's something you can do with a tripod. You can go and test out a 055 Manfrotto, put it on a scale, see how heavy it is, see how robust it is, and then see if you find an equivalent from another brand. The only trick parts of this is that you cannot buy a tripod online unless you already know what it looks like or how big it is, because it's very hard to decide how strong a tripod is if you never touched it, open it, and whatnot. With tripod, I mean, people see me standing on tripods. I open my tripod, I take the head off, and I stand with my feet on the tripod with the leg closed, of course, at the shorter distance, to prove how strong the tripod is. And it's a carbon fiber tripod. Hang on, twist them, see. If they're twisted too much, they're not good, okay? So try out a tripod in the store and compare to the 055. And as close as you get to the 055 or heavier, then you're making a good purchase. That is my advice. Okay. Next, where is it? Next, heads. Now, a good tripod, professional tripod, never comes with a head. It comes as a kit. Now, if the Manfrotto 55, you can buy just the leg, or then it will say kit and will tell you it comes with something else. Now, the head is what we attach the camera to, and there are different type of heads, but the main way things are ball heads, which Himanshu bought 1-2 months ago, and the three-way heads. What's the difference? If for tripod, the main difference is portability versus stability. When it comes to head, is precision versus speed, okay? A ball head, you have one knob that you undo, and you can do 3 movements in one. Basically, you can tilt, let me show you, stop share. So with a ball head, with one tilt, with one knob, I can do that, do this movement, and rotate. So wait, oh, and do this movement too. I wasn't doing this because the square format never do that, it doesn't need to. Okay, so you tilt, you pan, you go up and down, you do all the movement in one go. The freeway head, you had to release one lever, one knob to do this vertical move, another one to do the horizontal or the panning move. Okay, so obviously it is slower to use, but because you control each of the movement independently, you can obtain more precise results. And on top of that, there are some specialized three-way head, they're called geared. And the geared head has the knob to make the movement, and the movement is really fast. Once you free the camera, it's free to go. You know, as fast as you can move it, it moves. But the gear head does that. Plus, once you have a function that you can move the camera millimeter by millimeter by millimeter, and that is for super highly precise work. And probably if you're using macro, that's a good head to have. If you're using, I don't know, very precise, if you're doing precise work, if you're doing architecture and you're really fond of having super clean and straight things, you can really take your time and go slow with this head. I love the geared head is that I do a lot of still life work, and the precision to me comes over speed. And so I use a three-way head. Ball head are fast, and there's some ball head that have got it like a joystick. I don't know if you ever used a clutch of an airplane. No, it's not an airplane. Anyway, single lever that you can press these things and it moves, and then by the time you let go, it stays what it is. Even faster than this. This you have to turn something, so you need two hands with this ball head. You turn one lever and you move the camera with the other one. With this, just a dimension like the clutch one, you press, move all with one hand, and you let go. And I work with this wedding photographer. He was using this type of head. It was super fast. He doesn't have time for precision. Better get that shot than not getting it. And so he used that. So different tools, different aims, okay? If you are the generic photographer that doesn't specialize in something super fast, I would not recommend a ball head. It's a pain to you to get used to. It's just not that precise. And I wouldn't, in a studio, you don't really use, I mean, I've seen people using it in a studio too, but there is no real need for using a ball head in a studio, not in my opinion. And let's see if this is the end of today. Yes, and like last time, we end with this picture, just as a reminder to inspire yourself to go out there and take some. And look at this. This is a photo taken in the direction of the sun. This is what Kodak wrote on every film, on every camera. Don't ever shoot like this, but we turn. I shoot with the sun on our shoulder. But look at the effect. I mean, I'm sure it's photoshopped as well. Maybe the sun wasn't even there, but I don't know. Well, it looks like it was there. Yes, it's definitely there. But it gets these flary things, and it's beautiful and it's romantic and poetic. So please, by all means, shoot against any direction compared to the sun. Okay, I have come to the conclusion of this session today. There will be one more on Saturday where we talk more about studio gear.